Welcome to the Damascus Road podcast. On the road to Damascus, Paul had a radical encounter with Jesus and his life was changed forever. That is what we hope and pray for here. Now, on to this week's episode.
I am Tyler, and my wife here is Megan, and she is pregnant. For those of you who are not aware or not familiar with us, but she is pregnant. Our baby is due in May. And so we're finally got to the point where a few weeks ago, we could go in, get our ultrasound, see our little baby growing, and find out that we are having a little boy. So here he is, Louis James Stibrich. I don't know, there's a movement. Maybe I'm just going to scoot back a little bit. So here's Louis James Stibrich. He is healthy. He's developing as expected, though we will still have to wait and see if he ends up as big as his 9-pound, 10-ounce big brother was at birth. But we're both very excited to have another little boy in the house. And we're also so excited for Joe, because Joe's going to have a little brother now. And I look forward to seeing them play together, wrestle, wreak havoc, probably break their mom's vase or something like that at some point, and just generally get up to mischief and have a built-in best friend for life. Joe's going to be a big brother to a little brother, and I am just so excited for him. But I have to be honest, I'm also a little anxious, because I too am a little brother to a big brother. I do not have the best experience with big brothers. Here's a nice picture of my family. See how cute I am? Look at that. I'm like Joe size there, a little smaller. Yeah, we're pretty cute. We're a good-looking family. And that's my brother, Scott, in the red sweater right next to me. Now, sure, you look at that. How bad could he be? How could that little boy possibly give me any sort of bad experience with big brothers? Okay. Well, I think this picture is a bit better at representing our sibling dynamic. That's supposed to be a Mother's Day picture, but as you can see, Scott is like pulling me into a headlock while my mom is yelling at him to cooperate, and my sister is just rolling her eyes. I'm sure if anybody's here a big sister, you probably can relate to Stephanie in that picture. Most of my childhood experiences with Scott is that of a mean big brother picking on his little brother. And I don't have like cute stories like my wife did. If you remember last week, she shared about how her brother Jeff kept it a secret for 10 years that he peed in her shoes on Easter morning. No, my stories about my big brother are actually about how Scott burned me on the arm with a cigarette lighter once. Okay, that sounds bad. Let me tell the story. He would like to take more like those stick lighters, like this one, and he would turn them on for a second, and then he'd try to touch them to my skin and watch me freak out. He knew that the metal wasn't getting hot, it wasn't actually going to hurt me, but I still panicked, and he liked to watch me freak out. But then one day he tried it with a car cigarette lighter. So I know most cars don't even have these anymore, but he tried it with one of these. We were going out to dinner with my family. I think it was for Father's Day. And he was old enough to drive at this point. Honestly, actually, I'm pretty sure he was in college by this point. And for some reason, I maybe like living life on the edge and risking some danger. I rode in the car with him. And we got to the restaurant first. And so we were waiting for everyone else to get there and sitting in the car. And a bored big brother is a dangerous thing. So he pushed the lighter in, left it there for a second, then popped it out pretty quickly. I think he assumed that it was only a second. How hot could it be? It would just be something, again, to freak out his little brother. So he took it and he touched it to my arm. And we both quickly found out that he was very wrong. And it immediately burned my skin. Okay, now maybe tell him that it does sound bad. But hey, I at least have an interesting scar. Got an interesting scar out of it. It's like a little donut shape right on my forearm. I can show it to you sometime. Or, here's another time. There was one time I bit him, but it was with my mom's permission. Yeah, we were, Lacey, you're your youngest sibling, I can tell. We were on a road trip, and this was back in the days before TVs and DVD players were built into minivans. But my dad got really clever with our old Ford Aerostar, and he figured out how to strap in an old TV with a built-in VCR. I say that, and I now realize half of the people here might have no context for what any of that means. Layla, do you know what a VHS is? No? Okay. It's what came before DVD players, so we're not talking about like a nice little flat screen TV. It was like a boxy TV, took up some space. But my dad, I still think this was so clever, figured out how to strap it into the car, power it up, and connect it to the car stereo so that we could watch movies in the back and the drivers could like listen, and it was just a great way to pass the time on road trips. Now, again, because it was a bit of a big, boxy little TV, he had to fold over the middle bench seat in the van so that we could like strap it down, and then that meant all the rest of us had to sit 3 across in the very last row. So, well, it was worth it. The movies really helped while watching, while we were driving all day. It also meant that all 3 of us, me, my brother, and sister, were all squeezed in the back row and well out of the reach of our parents who were up in the driver's seat. And so my brother regularly took advantage of this situation and would pick on me. And one time, he got a hold of all of my money that I had had for the trip to spend on like fun souvenirs or snacks for myself, and then just refused to give it back to me. Now, I did all of the things that moms tell their children to do. I used my words. I said, please, Scott, give me back my money. I appealed to my parents. Now, to be clear, I knew none of this was going to work, but I knew I had to do this so that my mom could at least, I could say I did the right things. I checked all the boxes. But after that went on for a while, and Scott, despite my using my words, saying please, doing the right thing, never gave me my money back. He refused to give in. And at some point, I think my mom probably started yelling at him from the front seat. And finally, exasperated, Joanne Stibrich finally just told me to bite him. Now, no little brother is ever going to disobey that instruction, especially coming from mom. And I quickly latched onto my brother's shoulder as hard as I could with my teeth that every dentist has raved about. And I sunk in as deep as I could. And then he hit me on the head. Obviously injustice. He didn't get permission to do that. But in the end, I let go. He gave me my money back. And I never got to see what sort of scar I may have left on him. Now, there's more stories that I can share. I can share about how one time my brother and his best friend tried to convince me that some random musician that we heard on the radio was his friend's dad. And I'd met his friend's dad. I knew it wasn't this guy. So I never believed them, but they kept trying that for like years. I don't know why. Or I could tell you about how Scott would pin me down, and he would tickle me and leave me gasping for air and unable to get him off of me. Well, he would just insist, no, he's having fun because he's laughing. All of it just kind of would leave me feeling powerless and helpless. And as a result of his constant picking on me, I often said that I hated my brother. Now, even as I grew older, I might say, well, I loved my brother because, I knew I was supposed to love my brother, but I didn't like him. I felt a lot of hurt and tension regarding my brother. But at some point, things changed. And my relationship with my brother is now one of my most valued relationships in my family. Scott was the only person who knew for months that Meg and I were dating, because I needed my big brother for encouragement and advice before our first date. I reached out to him and asked for help. Later, he was the person I reached out to first for advice when I started shopping for an engagement ring. And then he stood next to me at my wedding. And then he came to visit us from across the country soon after Joe was born. So what changed? Well, one thing is we grew up. And I guess Scott realized that he liked having me around. And we started doing things like going skiing or going out for a beer together. And I got to see his patience, his generosity, and his thoughtfulness. And I became very grateful for my big brother. And I realized that I had a choice to make. I could hold on to my bitterness and my hurt. I could wait for him to apologize to me. Or I could choose to forgive and appreciate the relationship we had. So I chose forgiveness, and I released any need for Scott to ever apologize to me or work through any of it. And it's been a gift that we have been able to share with each other, our wives, and our children. Letting go of past hurts and choosing forgiveness, though, That is one of the hardest things that Jesus calls us to do as his followers. Because we feel hurt in our bodies, and we don't want to let it go. We want to see the person who hurt us hurt just the same. And maybe we even want to hurt them back. Forgiveness feels unfair. Forgiveness feels like we're letting them off the hook. We may feel like we're taking on their burdens when we were the ones who got hurt in the first place. The call to forgiveness can feel like a call to move forward and past something that we're just not ready to move on from. So then what do we do? To help us through that, we've been going through this series, Reaching for Forgiveness. And we're trying to work together and go through this practical 5-step process to forgive that was developed by the foremost researcher on forgiveness, Dr. Everett Worthington, a clinical psychologist and a follower of Jesus. Our hope is to not just decide to forgive, but to experience full emotional forgiveness, which is replacing negative, unforgiving emotions with the more positive emotions toward the wrongdoer. Or put it another way, intentionally replacing ill will towards the person who hurt you with goodwill towards them. This forgiveness is the heart of following Jesus, because we are forgiven, and forgiven people forgive people. But it's not natural, and we need to learn, we need to practice, and let the Holy Spirit give us the supernatural ability to forgive as we have been forgiven. And a powerful way of working through the process of emotional forgiveness is the REACH method that the series is based on. As a reminder, REACH is an acronym for the steps of this process. Recall the hurt, empathize, give the altruistic gift of forgiveness, commit to the forgiveness that you have experienced, and hold on to the forgiveness when you doubt. Now, so far we've covered recall the hurt and empathize. Ryan taught us first that the first step to forgiveness isn't pretending that we weren't hurt, but to recall the hurt and to go back and try to understand it. We need to look at it objectively, not to excuse or to dismiss the hurt, but also not to ruminate or rehearse it either. Instead, we're trying to learn to remember the hurt accurately, without speculation or mind reading and making assumptions. And then last week, Megan taught us to empathize through the practice of redemptive remembering. This means we learn to view someone through a lens of grace and love so that we can actively feel compassion and empathy towards them. Redemptive remembering and empathy allows us to hold the idea that you hurt me and that wasn't okay in tension with, I see why this happened and I wish good for you, as hard as that may be. But we're coming to the point of our process where the rubber starts to meet the road. Now, those 2 steps are absolutely necessary and we cannot skip them. But we're not yet talking about, we're not yet actually at that point of forgiving a hurt. And now we really need to start thinking about what does it mean to actually forgive a person. We need to let go and give up our hurt, our pain, our right to feel angry, our desire for justice. We consider what it means to give the altruistic gift of forgiveness. Now, I guess brothers tend to be ripe ground for discussions about forgiveness because we've been walking through the story of Joseph and his brothers as we unpack the REACH process. Now, Joseph's story makes up most of the last 12 chapters of Genesis and offers us an in-depth look at a story of hurt and pain, growth and forgiveness, and of God doing amazing things through all of that. Now, to recap the story so far, Joseph, son of Jacob, grew up in a household with favorites. As the favorite son of a father whose own father played favorites. And he's the only son of Rachel, Jacob's favorite of his 4 wives. It's pretty messy. His brothers could not take out their anger on their father, so instead they took it out on him. And they left him in a hole and sold him into slavery in Egypt after having enough of his immaturity, his arrogance, and favorite status in their complicated and broken family. And then once he's in Egypt, Jacob's life goes from bad to better to worse to miraculous. He's abused, he's scapegoated, he's punished, forgotten, and despite all of that, he comes into a position of power greater than he could have possibly imagined while languishing in prison. After interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, foretelling 7 great years of plenty followed by 7 terrible years of famine, and proposing a wise plan of storing up and saving for that famine, Pharaoh appoints Joseph to be the governor of Egypt, to be his right-hand man, the second in command of the ancient world's greatest superpower. And Joseph has risen at this point to incredible power. And then 7 years later, the famine hits, as was predicted, and it is so terrible that it reaches his father and brothers in Canaan as well. So then Jacob hears that there is grain in Egypt, and so he sends 10 of his least favorite sons to go bring some back for their family. Joseph was governor of all Egypt and in charge of selling grain to the people, so it was to him that his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and he spoke harshly to them. "Where are you from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We have come to buy food." And although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. Joseph is in charge of the one country that was prepared for this terrible famine. And then his brothers show up, needing help. They bow down to him, fulfilling his dream from so long ago. And while he immediately recognizes him, they have no idea that the man who holds their fate in his hands is the brother they hurt. So what's Joseph going to do? What would you do? I mean, the natural human response is to get back at them. Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, and now he has the power to throw them in prison. My brother was picking on me and making me feel helpless, so I bit him. They hurt us, so we want to hurt them. But this creates a problem, because once we start hurting each other, neither of us can just go back. Whatever we have done, we can't undo it. We can't take that action back. We can't make it undone. Hannah Arendt was a philosopher and a historian who called this the problem of irreversibility. That once we have done something, no matter how much we might regret it or how bad it might be, we cannot undo it. She considered this the great problem that we face in human existence, particularly in our relationships to each other. Because of the problem of irreversibility, revenge, to paraphrase Arendt, is the natural and automatic reaction to hurt. And because of irreversibility, the next step is in a series of hurts that can be expected and even calculated. Or put it this way, hurting is natural, and hurt people hurt people. Joseph's brothers could not undo what they had done to Joseph, and now Joseph had an incredible opportunity for revenge. And Joseph seems to give in a little bit, at least to a degree, and he starts to mess with them. He repeatedly tests his brothers. He accuses them of being spies, and he imprisons his brother Simeon. He demands they bring back Benjamin, Rachel's second son, who was born after Joseph's exile. And he wants them to bring Benjamin with them the next time they come back for wheat. And then when that time comes and they finally do come back, meanwhile Simeon's been in prison this whole time, Jacob is resistant to allowing Benjamin, his remaining favorite son, to go. But the famine is persistent, and so he must relent. Now this time when the brothers leave Egypt with the grain, Joseph has his own silver cup placed in Benjamin's sack and then accuses him of stealing it. So now he's put his brothers in this position where he has given them the opportunity yet again to get rid of their favored younger brother. Now maybe Joseph is just being wise and he's making sure they've changed from his traitorous ways. But as a little brother, it's pretty easy to find some satisfaction in Joseph's actions as he's really stressing them out and he's putting some real fear into his brothers, into his big brothers. Because again, revenge is the natural, automatic reaction as the process of hurt and hurt back irreversibly moves forward. But when we get our revenge, what's next? Well, their natural next step is to hurt us back. It's a cycle of hurt that is inescapable with simply more revenge. So how do we escape the problem of irreversibility? Interestingly, Arendt recognizes that forgiveness, given by the one who was hurt to the one who hurt them, is the only escape. In contrast to revenge, which is the natural automatic reaction to transgression, the act of forgiving can never be predicted. In the cycle of hurt and revenge that we may find ourselves in, forgiveness is something that's unexpected and new, because hurting is natural, but forgiveness is supernatural. It upends the cycle of hurt freeing both the forgiver and the forgiven from the consequences of irreversibility. Arendt recognizes that the freedom contained in Jesus' teachings of forgiveness is the freedom from vengeance. Forgiveness is the only way to end the cycle of forgiveness and hurt. It's the only way to be free of bitterness and resentment that can eat at our souls, and it is what our world desperately needs. Hurting is natural, but forgiveness is supernatural. It frees both people. We all need the gift of forgiveness, and we all need to give it. And Joseph shows us the way to get there, because he has given his brothers the opportunity to betray Benjamin, just as they betrayed him. And he's made it even easier. This time around, there's no conspiracy on their part. There's no need for that. All they have to do is let the governor of Egypt arrest Benjamin with the evidence that he has of this crime that Benjamin has supposedly committed. But what happens? Judah, who was the first to suggest selling Joseph to slavers, speaks up and asks to take Benjamin's place. He will be enslaved and imprisoned. He will bear the cost. Rabbis used to teach that repentance is complete when you face the same situation where you were tempted and fell, only this time you do the opposite. Well, this time Joseph's brothers do the opposite. Now, one point of the story is that reconciliation is messy. Certainly, this seems like a pretty messy situation. And maybe Joseph did want to hurt his brothers back a little bit. Maybe he needed to see if they were changed. And maybe people are complicated and Joseph's motives are a little bit mixed. But now, Joseph has a chance to inflict real pain on Judah, the brother who led his betrayal. Joseph can just easily, right now, make Judah a slave just as he was. The difference being that Joseph can also go a little bit further and make sure Judah never gets the opportunities that Joseph had to rise up. He can go throw Judah into the deepest pit in Egypt to slave away the rest of his life. However, that's not what Joseph does. Instead, Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you," so that he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. And then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. Joseph clears the room of everyone but him and his brothers and weeps. He weeps so loudly that the Egyptians can still hear him from outside that room. The sound of his weeping carries throughout the house. And his weeping is the sound of a man forgiving the unforgivable. It is impossible that he should forgive his brothers, and yet he does. Hurting is natural. Forgiveness is supernatural. And imagine how his brothers must feel. This man who held their fate in his hand suddenly begins weeping loudly. It may be the sound of forgiveness, but they don't know that yet. So Joseph brings them in. "Please come closer," he says to them. So they came closer. And he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, who you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset. Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." He extends to them the grace of redemptive remembrance. He retells the story of their betrayal as the story of God's providence. He brings them back into relationship with him. Weeping with joy, he embraced Benjamin, and Benjamin did the same. Then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them. And after that, they began talking freely with him. So much weeping. The sound of a man forgiving the unforgivable continues. Now, I cannot imagine the brothers ever expected to see Joseph again. And would they have ever dared to hope that after what they had done to him, that he would embrace them? They could not undo what they had done. The hurt they had inflicted on Joseph, their father, their whole family. All the time, Joseph was in Egypt, and they had to live with that. After all of this time, the scene is unimaginable. How could they ever be forgiven? Simply because forgiveness can only be a gift. When the problem of irreversibility says that I cannot undo what I have done, then it can only be undone as a gift of the person that I have hurt. Forgiveness is a gift because it's simply not the natural response to hurt. Joseph should hurt his brothers back. The problem of irreversibility is that something must come next, and hurting them back is the natural next step. Hurting is natural. But Joseph doesn't hurt them back. He gives the gift of forgiveness. And forgiveness is a gift because it's not fair. Whenever there is a transgression, a debt is incurred. A price must be paid, and somebody must bear the cost. It's the old law of an eye for an eye. So you owe, and now you must pay. But forgiveness rewrites that old law, and it becomes you owe, I pay. The debt is not erased, it is simply paid by someone else. When we forgive, we bear the cost. Joseph bore the cost of his brother's betrayal. So no, it's not fair. It is a gift. And finally, forgiveness is a gift because it frees the doer and the sufferer from the problem of irreversibility. They can't take it back, and we can't forgive it. We must either remain hurt and bitter, possibly even try to hurt them back, or even if we don't hurt them back, we're still likely to pass that hurt on to someone else and continue the cycle. Or we can do something new, something entirely new, and start a brand new cycle and give the gift of forgiveness. So to help us give this gift, we needed to develop compassion. We need to expand our empathy from just our story about this particular hurt to the whole person. As I've been working through my own hurts that I need to forgive, I find myself wanting the people who've hurt me to be hurt themselves, but I don't plan to hurt them myself. Instead, I want to hear about how they're experiencing hurt because of their choices, because things aren't working out for them. Now, I justify this. I frame it to myself as, well, I just want them to experience consequences, right? I want the natural consequences of their poor choices. It's benevolent, right? I want them to grow. I want them to, they're not making good choices, so natural consequences will help them to learn and grow, right? But I realize that really what I want to be validated. Because I want to know that what I think is right. And I want to hear that they're hurting too. I'm not replacing ill will with goodwill, because it's a much different thing to will someone's good than it is to will their consequences. Joseph saw that his brothers had changed. They cared for Benjamin. They did what was right. To will their good is to celebrate their growth, even if they didn't have to suffer the consequences that we longed for. And the reality is we should remember anyways that everyone who hurt me is also someone who's been hurt. Joseph's brothers are people who have been hurt by a father who played clear favorites. Jacob never tried to hide that he loved Joseph more, just like he never tried to hide that he loved Rachel more than their mothers. They spent their whole lives working and striving for their father's favor, even though they knew they would never get it. And Jacob's been hurt too. His own father Isaac favored his brother Esau over him because Esau was tough and strong and masculine. Jacob was small and tricky and had to resort to his cleverness to get by. And Jacob was used by his mother to get back at his father, which resulted in Jacob's exile from his home for many years. The problem of irreversibility has gone on for generations in Joseph's family. It's the story of Genesis, as hurt continues to be passed down and passed forward. And to help us give the gift, we need to remember not only that they've been hurt as well, but we need to remember our own forgiveness. Jesus on the cross gives us the ultimate display of the gift of forgiveness. Luke and Matthew paint the scene for us. Two others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to a cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. The Son of God, reduced to the status of criminals and murderers. He is even mocked while on the cross. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Look at you now," they yelled at him. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well then, if you are the Son of God, save yourself and come down from the cross. Jesus had been hurt by so much at this point. He has suffered more injustice than any of us could imagine. And as his mockers acknowledge, even if they're being tongue-in-cheek about it, he does have the power to do something. He could come down from the cross and hurt everyone who has hurt him, who has betrayed him, who has abandoned him. He would be right to do so by our human ideas of justice and vengeance. But that is not what Jesus does. While hanging between two guilty criminals, Jesus prays, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." Jesus' forgiveness is nothing short of pure gift. His crucifiers, his tormentors, his mockers, and honestly, we too often do not understand the depth of what we do in our sin, how we are hurting one another, and how we hurt God. We can do nothing to undo it, but Jesus forgives us. Now, one of the powerful truths about Hannah Arendt's insights into forgiveness is that she was not a Christian. Yet she could still not help but recognize that the discoverer of the role of forgiveness in the realm of human affairs was Jesus of Nazareth. Because Jesus is central to our ability to receive and give forgiveness. And the heart of that is love. Because with every altruistic gift of forgiveness, someone is paying a price. Jesus pays the price for us. Joseph is paying the price of forgiving his brothers, and we pay the price when we forgive. What was done is forgiven for the sake of who did it. It is the reason for the Christian conviction that only love has the power to forgive. Arendt understands what Jesus saw and taught, that love possesses an incredible power of self-revelation and other revelation. It allows us to see one another with unequaled clarity, and it bridges the gap between me and you, forgiven and forgiver. So Arendt concludes that love, by reason of its passion, destroys the in-between, which relates us to and separates us from others. Love, by its very nature, is unworldly. So in other words, hurting is natural. Forgiveness is supernatural. And because of Jesus, we remember his love. We remember his forgiveness of us. We can do what never seemed possible and forgive others as we have been forgiven. Going out from today, we need to take time to remember how we have been forgiven ourselves, both by God but also by others, because doing so helps us to give that gift to others and to pass it on. So I encourage you to spend some time reflecting on your own forgiveness. Start by making a list of times that you have received the gift of forgiveness, again, both from God but also practically from someone else. And we're going to focus on one of these times as part of our practice in a little bit. And as you do, remember the joy of being forgiven. Remember what else you may have felt. Did you feel, when you were forgiven, did you feel gratitude? Did you feel relief? Those are good things. Hold on to those feelings and remember them. And if you've been working through the workbook that goes along with this series, then don't forget to take the time this week to work through the sections in the Reach workbook on the altruistic gift of forgiveness. You should be able to access a digital version through Church Center, and if you'd like a hard copy, please let us know and we will help you get one. And everything that I'm encouraging you to do this morning comes from that section of the workbook, so don't worry, you've already got to start on it. And finally, ask God to help you forgive as you have been forgiven. If you're not sure what to say, use the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our sins as we have forgiven those who sin against us. It is good to ask God for help forgiving others, but we remember our own forgiveness as well. And part of the practice, and then after we think about that, is going to be turn around and write a letter of gratitude for being forgiven. Write a thank you note. And I know I will be spending some time writing a letter to my wife, Megan. Because last year I had to confess to her something that I'd done that had hurt her, that I knew would hurt her. And she didn't know about it and wouldn't start to feel or experience the hurt until I shared my confession with her. I wished I could go back and undo the things, because I never want to hurt her, but I did. But when she responded, the very first thing she said to me was, "I forgive you." Now that didn't negate the hurt that she felt. It didn't immediately undo everything. But that was the most incredible gift she's ever given me. She affirmed her love for me and her willingness to walk forward with me to something new, rather than repeat the cycle of hurt and the problem of irreversibility. So may we give the gift of forgiveness as well. It may be the hardest thing we do, because it isn't natural. It's not the natural thing to do in response to our hurt. But hurting is natural. Forgiveness is supernatural. Please pray with me. Dear Father, thank you for the gift of forgiveness. Please help us to forgive others as you have forgiven us. In your holy name. Amen.
Thank you for joining the Damascus Road podcast. Our mission is to follow Jesus together by being with God, loving everyone, transforming people, developing leaders, growing new ministries, and changing the world. You can find out more about us online at DamascusRoadTucson.com.